Hi guys, thank you very much for coming. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about a project we did with Microsoft, which was a 3-day hackathon, or our work focused around a 3-day hackathon, where we took, as we say, a legacy application and put it in Windows containers in a very clumsy and genuinely hacky way. And the lessons we learned and a lot of the techniques we use. So I'm going to kind of skim over things because we're going to talk about value stream mapping. We'll talk about a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the containerization. And we'll talk a little bit about moving to VSTS, for example. So if you've got any, like I say, I'll skim across that. If you've got any questions at the end, please just come talk to me. And if I can't answer you, I will find out for you. Okay. Now, I was supposed to, or I usually deliver this talk with Marcus from Microsoft. So I will attempt to bring his expertise from my memory. But every time there are quite a lot of references in here to Marcus as if he's here, so please forgive me for that one. Okay. So who knows anything about Callcredit? I've got a few of you who know a lot about it. Okay, so we are one of the credit reference agencies in the UK and Spain and America. And as a credit reference agency, our business is mainly data. So we literally just make sure we've got the right data to the right people as quickly as possible. That's our core business. And we have quite a lot of products that we host on our own infrastructure or in our own cloud environment. So we've got a lot of control over how those applications are delivered and the operations around that. We've been a .NET house from the beginning, though we do have one product that works on Linux. And we also run Elk Stack, so that's all on Linux as well. But yeah, so we're very controlled, very .NET, very highly secure business. But over the years, we've acquired a few different, what we call the software products, where we're actually creating something that we deliver the software to a customer. And once we've delivered that software to a customer, the environment they're sticking that on is very much outside of our control. So it's a really different animal in terms of the delivery pipeline and the form of delivery. And also, people, you get things like people won't upgrade, or people will ignore your prerequisites, or it's a lot more exciting than the data products. So that's what we're talking about here. So Callcredit loves DevOps. As Andy will tell you, we turned up at Leeds DevOps about 3 years ago and said, well, this sounds great. Well, how do we do all this DevOps thing? And they said, well, tell us about yourselves. And we said, well, we work in .NET. And at that point, the room just sort of fell about laughing. And you can't do that. But over those intervening years, we've actually got all those data products. We've got full routes to live now. We can't have continuous deployment into live because we're very regulated. So, for example, you can't have the person who writes the code push the code all the way into live. You have to have control gates. But yeah, we feel that we've embraced the DevOps revolution quite thoroughly. However, we've always got a long way to go. Now, Numéro. So one of those software products that we acquired over the last, I think it's about 1.5 years ago, we acquired Numéro. And it's an absolutely fantastic solution that it's basically a customer interaction solution. So, for example, you can pick and choose what components you might have. But, for example, you might have a logistics company, and if somebody calls you, a customer, the moment they call you, you immediately see all their details on your screen. Every previous interaction you've had with them is all there for you to see. Their accounts information is linked to what you see on screen. So you end up with a really seamless customer experience. Gone a bit further in recent times with a chat application which sort of enhances that experience slightly more, and also things like scraping of Twitter and Facebook to find keywords and then prioritizing certain interactions as being more urgent because of the use of certain keywords. It's a really, really fascinating and fantastic solution. And I think we're very lucky to have them. So these are a few of the people who use it at the moment. I think Misguided is one of the most recent ones, and we actually had to change the chat app to fit with their website. So I'll talk about that when we talk about the value stream mapping in a minute. But if you imagine that each of these are hosting Numéro on their own infrastructure, just a couple of them have taken it as software as a service, and we are trying to kind of push that because it is a lot more comfortable to have it in a form that we can manage for them. But, for example, I pick out UK Visa. They are so secure that we can never see where they've deployed it. But they're also so huge that their forest of servers is just massive. It's bigger than anything we have in any of the sort of in our in-house software solutions. And we know that they use Octopus, for example, to deploy it, but we can't see that. So it's you're sort of seeing the challenge that we have of making sure that our software is going to run reliably for all these really disparate companies, all running different versions, different configurations on very different infrastructure. So what is Numéro? So under the bonnet, like most of our products, it's another .NET one. Windows uses a SQL database. We also use Java on Tomcat and Node.js on iOS as well. And Nginx we use for routing as well. Tools they use to write it, to produce it, deliver it. Now, the actual list is so long that we tried to write it out at one point and we just ran out of board. But mainly, they use Visual Studio. They commit into Git. They have Jenkins mainly to run their tests and builds. They have Redmine, Grunt, and they have a couple of different package managers, but I think the main one that they use is Artifactory at the moment. So we're trying to welcome them into the fold and try and rationalize some of this a little bit. So what we did to begin with, before the hackathon even started, Marcus from Microsoft got us all in a room at Numéro, at great offices at Stockport, and we'd literally, most of the people in the room had never seen the Numéro solution before. Most of us had never met each other before, and I just think it's a real credit to the people at Numéro that even though we'd bought them and we were sort of coming in sort of mob-handed to see about what was going on, they're just so open and so willing to talk about their product and be really quite critical of it as well. There's no worrying about calling a baby ugly. They were right in there making sure that, you know, we could see the good and the bad, which I really do admire. But we started off by getting Chris there to draw up the actual architecture of the product, which ended up looking a little bit like this. Obviously, he didn't draw his lines quite so straight, but so the main thing I'd like to point out here is they used to have a core product, which it's the structure of it, the architecture of that particular piece is now about 8 years old, and that is a monolith. All the more recently developed pieces, like there's a product whereby you can create and edit your own UI. There's various APIs. So they are all microservices. So though they've got this sort of clunky monolith, which is their core product, everything that they've done subsequently has been a lot more of a microservices architecture, which is useful. Okay, so we started out with the value stream mapping. What do you guys know about value stream mapping? Anything? Well, I know that Marcus has talked about this before, but what we needed to do was just start from a perspective of just literally saying it how it is. We're not putting any value judgment on anything, not not thinking about what we might want it to be, but just literally going through the entire delivery process from idea to having customers using a product and having it in support, and laying out exactly what steps you need to go through to make that product what it is, right in that moment. So we started out, as you can see here, there's sales. So we looked at exactly what goes on to interact with the customer at that stage and to design the product with them, really. Look at their needs. Moved through all the sort of proof of concept stuff, which isn't on there yet, through development, and then we went into test and release, etc. So that was it was actually quite difficult to stay in the moment with that because everyone was always, we'd all come in that room thinking about the hackathon and thinking what we could do better. But we needed to stick with what we had now. Sorry, these are Marcus's slides. I've got pictures of me on them. So yeah, we managed to, as you can see, we had a lot of devs in the room. So we ended up with a lot of detail in the development section of our value stream mapping. But we managed to get it all out. I'll show you it in a little bit more detail in a minute. Once we had written out everything that went on, then we began to be able to criticize it a little bit. So Chris there's got a red pen, and he's picking out any types of waste that we could detect in here. So for example, waste started right back here in sales. We've got written in there somewhere, not on the lorry. That was the first piece of waste that we identified. Salespeople are actually going out and selling something that they wish existed, not something that was actually in our portfolio of products that we had to sell. So that was very interesting. I think that's a challenge a lot of companies end up with. It's so focused on the sale that you end up kind of just tweaking the offering. And then that, of course, causes a lot of inefficiency because we actually do have building blocks of products that probably would have sorted out their needs, but they've sold something slightly different. So that was the first waste that we came up for. And we found waste also in the sales opportunity, the proof of concept, the planning phase. I'll show you how much waste we found in here in a moment. Yeah, through development, through release, and then into deployment to the customer and support for the customer as well. Another interesting thing that we found was for each of these steps, we put down exactly who would be involved in the step and how long the step would take. We actually ended up with release with a little infinity symbol in it because there were certain things that would never be released. There were certain customers who would never actually take the updates, whether it's because their contract no longer allowed them to have updates or because they were just like, no, it works, please leave it alone. They were basically being the ops and we were being the dev in the very old school sense. So do you see lots of reds appearing there? And some of the waste we identified, a lot of these were duplication, a lot of these were manual tasks. And we had things like having to log on to every single server in the test environment to deploy the latest release before you could go through and test it. Things like when we were building the build, it could actually take 8 hours to build the solution. If the tests within that build fail, that has to be done again. So there's no immediacy of getting your code out there and being able to be tested. The thing that was sort of both wonderful and awful at the same time for them was that the reason it was taking so long and these tests were so huge was just because they'd been so passionate about doing it, but then not ever had the time to properly curate those tests and rationalize them, make them absolutely what they needed to be. So that's what they're stuck with at the moment. And I can show you in greater depth if you'd like at a different time. So before we started to get down about the red pen, we were able to pick up the green pen. At this point, it was looking at the obvious solutions that we had in our minds right there. thinking about exactly what we could do about this. And so much of it was, fix the tests, release in smaller batches, things that it seems, when I talk about the solutions we were finding, the problems we were finding, it just seems so obvious, but I think we all know what it's like when you're just doing the same thing every day, and those who are controlling that process aren't that bothered about sort of creating a better process. They're just bothered about delivering the thing. And that's a trap that most companies do get into at some point, I think. So it ended up looking like this. Let me think about what I'd like to see. Yeah, this is a list of all the tools they were using. As you can see, that was something else that we could rationalize. We realized that there's so many of these things that we could we could combine into one. Also, yes, bringing testing left, another obvious one, but they didn't ever test their requirements. So that was another good one that we could pick up on. So, sales, we've got the not on the lorry. Dev, manual deployments, and so many, we've got some W's in here for waiting for somebody else to do a manual step. Those long builds, causing failures, causing queued builds, causing people to have to be heroes, because of course somebody's got to be there. Yes, all the actual build and tests are all being run by Jenkins, but somebody's kicking them off and sort of face palming when they don't go right. Deployments being manual over RDP to each server. Having so many different customers, I think it's about 30 that they've got currently in contract using the software. So if we were doing it right and making sure they were all on the latest version, just imagine RDPing to every single one of their live servers. And of course, the absolute forest of different versions they've got out there. It's not very easy to support. And may I say, I hate it when I have to talk about the problems with this product, because it is a fantastic product and somehow it's working, you know what I mean? But when you look at it like this, you realize that all that red pen, it's not just a problem, it's also a risk. So it's very, very much worth it while for the business to look at this. So we did our value stream mapping and we thought about all the stuff that we'd want to do better. But actually, our top brass had some ideas of their own about what they wanted to come out of this project. And here we go. They wanted it to be portable so that we could deploy it not just onto a customer environment, but onto Azure, onto AWS, onto our own tin if we wanted. We wanted to be able to push and update once to all those live instances, none of this RDPing nonsense. We wanted to be able to have a situation where if a customer calls up with a problem, we could just spin up an instance which matched theirs and see the problem ourselves. Because with the best will in the world, those customers are still going to be very highly secure. They're not going to let us actually onto their machines. We wanted this methodology to apply to our other software products. We have some other products, for example, where I came from, Decision Metrics. They are a company that take data from all the different credit bureaus and fraud agencies, for example. They bring it all together in a workflow, and actually they make a credit decision about a customer in an automated fashion. And they have a very similar thing where they are often installed on a customer site. Again, very secure. For example, Lloyds Bank need its installed on their premises because they're letting our solution talk to their own databases internally. Again, we're not allowed to see those databases. So we want to sort of come up with something here that was going to work for all of these products. Of course, we want it to be scalable, on demand, Black Friday, Boxing Day, and we want it to be resilient. We're looking at having something that would actually be genuinely self-healing. So with that list of really easy requirements in mind, we decided that containers were the most obvious thing to try. Marcus, obviously being from Microsoft and leading us, he could have been very, draconian about wanting us to try a certain thing, because I knew he really wanted to try containers, but he did try and talk us into sort of investigating platform as a service, for example. And he was actually very open that we should find the right solution, not just the popular Microsoft solution at that moment. So, another thing that he was very flexible about was he was saying, well, they already use Jenkins to build. Why, keep using Jenkins? I think he kind of wanted to have a play with it, but there's plenty of reasons, as you see, why we wanted to actually try it with VSTS. So we've always used TFS in-house within those data products that I talked about. And also, having acquired these other software houses, we were wanting to get them into the same source control as everybody else, of course. But the best way, since we were looking at going to VSTS anyway, it's much easier to integrate these other companies onto using VSTS than it is to sort of give them access to our internal TFS. So that was a really logical reason to have a go with this. And yeah, because we were thinking of going on to VSTS, this was an amazing chance to evaluate VSTS and to really give it a go. People who've never used it before, how quickly can we pick it up? Can we use the same processes that we use in our slightly outdated at the moment version of TFS? And we're really, really keen on not having to have a team internally managing it as well. The fact that Microsoft are going to handle the updates and get those updates out before they release the TFS ones. All those are really attractive things. So now I'm just going to skip a little bit forward because these are Marcus's slides and he wants to tell you about how amazing VSTS. In fact, he actually uses the phrase, it's DevOps in a box. At which point I throw things at him and then we agree to disagree. The idea of it being in a box really hurts my brain and my heart. But anyway, so I'm just going to go past that. If you want to talk about VSTS or even see a very little bit about it, I'm very happy to show you that afterwards. But so, again, the nitty-gritty of trying to get this legacy software and all those different tools that they currently use, and forget all that. Now we're going to stick it all in VSTS. We're going to build its containers, dead simple. So what we needed to do before we met for our hackathon was we decided that we weren't going to do the whole Numéro solution. That's daft. They've got like 20 different components. So we just thought, right, there's like core services monolith. They need a database, SQL database, and then the identity component that just lets you access the other two components. So we're just going to work on those for our 3 days. Also, my team within Callcredit, we're a system build team. So basically what we do is literally just make sure that systems are going to work in terms of deploying them. So we'd never used Numéro before. We'd never installed it before. We thought, right, we've got to get to know this. So we got their 28-page. I think that might be an underestimate. I think it was probably more than that. 28-page instructions on how to install Numéro. And we completely failed to install it correctly. And then we got the guys from Numero to come across and help us actually install it. But doing that was an amazing process for us to learn how it actually all hangs together. By doing that, we confirmed the prereqs. Once we'd done that, we were able to create a pipeline within our Octopus deploy solution, which we use to update all our products in-house. Doing that actually meant that we had to write PowerShell scripts. So those PowerShell scripts were going to come in really, really useful once we started our hackathon. So of course we set up a sandbox that we could play in Azure, and we set up another sandbox in VSTS, made sure that all the comms between the two were okay. Finally, we imported the code that we needed from into VSTS, from Git, which they were already using. So that really made a big difference to how quickly we could get on when we started the actual hack. So we had colleagues from my team, System Build, our sister team, Platform Build. They're the ones, so we automate the pipeline for software to get to live. Our sister team automate the building of the infrastructure. And we work very closely together. We had some of the guys from Numéro there. We had Dev, we had Test, and we had some of our colleagues over from Lithuania as well, which was good, because we're very lucky to have some amazing colleagues over there. So again, it was a really, oh sorry, I missed out David there, the architects. So it was a really mixed team, all just never done anything like this before, being guided by a team of 3 from Microsoft, who their expertise was amazing. And we kind of divided ourselves up between whether we were going to work on getting the builds to work, because of course it had never been in VSTS before, we hadn't even tried to build it in there before. And we had a team of us trying to make sure that the tests, there was some testing in there and some monitoring. And then we had deployment. So we were going to build our 3 components, and we were going to make sure we had a proper release process in Docker. We wanted to have tests on live environments, and we wanted it all to be running in Azure. And of course, we wanted it to be monitoring. I think it's quite easy to have that so inherent in what you do that you forget that you need to think about it as something like this. So we wanted to make sure that we had that set up as well. So we started out with using Azure DevTest Labs, which just seemed like it was a really easy way to make sure that we all had access to an environment where we had the latest Visual Studio. And it's so easy to go into Azure and create a DevTest Lab, literally just create a new thing, pick DevTest Lab, and then you've got an environment where you can build. It's like a sandbox within a sandbox where you can just play within a development environment. So when you're creating a DevTest Lab as well, a really good thing you can do is tell it to shut down automatically. So the first thing we did to make sure we weren't going to end up with this massive bill at the end of it was to make sure that all our machines were auto shut down. Also, we made sure that even though our scheduled shutdown was 6 p.m., we knew we'd be there till 9 some of those nights. So we ended up putting in a webhook to Slack as well. So just as it was about to shut down, we got a message saying, do you really want this to shut down? We could all go, no, I'm still busy. So once you've got a DevTest Lab, you can add machines to it. And you can pick what base image you want. And we picked VS Enterprise 2017 on Windows 10. And you can just give it a name, you can give it your username and password. Just specify all the things that you want that machine to be. You can give it a public IP address if you need it, which of course we did, so that we could actually access it. And we actually also set them to expire on a certain date about a week after the hack ended, so that we could have a bit more playtime with them, but they weren't persisting. So yeah, we just picked one of the standard machine builds there. That's 2 cores, 7 gig of RAM, 4 disks, and it had load balancing on there as well. Another good thing you can do with DevTest Labs, and this is unique to DevTest Labs in Azure, is that you can tell it which artifacts to automatically install for you as part of the build. So, for example, we had Firefox, and we used Chocolatey as well. Oh, that's gone one too far there. There we go. Yeah, so by installing Chocolatey, we then were able to just put a little command line in there so that Chocolatey then went and grabbed a few other things for us as well. Just things like Notepad++, just stuff that you need to exist. So yeah, once we'd done this hard work, which really didn't take very long, we were then able to create a formula, so a couple of clicks, and then we had a reusable base image. So the next time we wanted the same machine, we could just pick that instead of going through all the menu options. It's really, really useful. And we were a little bit in love with that and kind of wanted to keep playing with that, but we had to get on, so. That's just that where you can start, stop, or delete your machines as well. It's all really nice to use. But so Marcus was very proud that the first output of our hack was that there wasn't actually an image in DevTest labs to automatically install Docker. So he created that, uploaded it, made it publicly available instantly. So that was a really nice artifact to have there in the public domain, usable for everybody immediately. So it was really nice. At many stages during the hack, we were creating something or finding a bug or something that could then immediately go back to Microsoft. They could sort it out for us, and then it was publicly available. So we had it was really, really nice to be at the cutting edge of that and seeing them so responsive and actually caring about whether it, not just worked, but was good to use. So how much work have you guys done with containers in the past, or how aware are you of how they work? Pretty au fait. Sure. Well, you guys know containers are a very good way to encapsulate an application so that it will run the same wherever you put it. That's the main reason we wanted to use containers. So I think that's the best summary I can use for it. So we were using Windows Server Core 2016 for this. Later on, when we were experimenting on our own, we were using Nano instead. But just for this, Core was more of a known quantity, and it was easier to get up and running faster without building lots of sort of prerequisite containers just for this particular purpose. So yeah, we started with that. And then we would go on to build containers for the prereqs we'd identified in our pre-hack work, and then we would put the actual 3 Numéro components into containers as well. And we're going to upload those to an image repository that we created in our Azure environment. So you all know why it's wonderful to use containers in the DevOps world. So the devs can build their apps and just simply upload it to a central repo. Ops can grab them and make sure that they're working in live. And they can feed back constantly with test results and metrics to the developers so that they can see exactly how it's running in a really real environment. I'm just going to flick through a few of those because these are Microsoft's slides again, the ones that Marcus likes to talk through. So I'll skim across these a little bit. And just going through the idea of finding bugs and fixing them. So yeah, back to the architecture of Numéro. These are the 3 components that we decided to use for our hack and get those working. Now, a little bit controversially, because we were container happy, we stuck the database in a container as well. We really like containers. We do absolutely agree and have always known that you don't want to put your database in a container. But just for this purpose, we wanted to just see it running. So we would have, I don't know, put our pets in a container at this stage. We were that enthusiastic about it. So the first thing we did was create some Docker files to install our prerequisites. So, of course, IIS with .NET 4.5. And so we just said where we're going to get this image from. Of course, we wanted PowerShell as our shell because, of course, all our installers that we'd created were all PowerShell ones. And we were able to just run standard PowerShell within the Docker file. This was just something to keep the container alive. It's a good example of how this has already moved on, because we did this in May. The technology has already moved on now. We wouldn't really have to have a little service running the whole time to keep the container alive now. But we just sort of hacked these little things in at the time. So IIS, there's a Docker file. And then we wanted to stick Tomcat Java in, again, PowerShell. And we just told it to look at the script we'd already written to install that. Really nice and simple. Well, of course, we had to do the work first. Then the core services, that's that monolith, which is the main Numéro product from years ago that has been updated sort of in situ over the years. And so we had quite a few artifacts to copy to make that work. Again, a bug that we found, we had to put this registry hack in to make the DNS resolution work. But by the time we finished the hack, they'd already fixed that. So that was really, really good. So yeah, you tell it what PowerShell file to run again, and you tell it what port to expose as well. Do the same for Node.js, standard installers, just invoking stuff that's already there, either in PowerShell or in our scripts that we'd run. And this is what we did when we put the SQL server in a container, which we kind of enjoyed doing, but we won't ever do that again. So, of course, we had to add Nginx as well to make the solution hang together. And we set about trying to make it build for the first time in VSTS. So, what we did, I don't know if you're familiar with VSTS at all. I'll just show you really quickly. You can pull in steps, so you're reducing the actual scripting you have to do. They already had grunt build, so we were able to just get the grunt sort of plugin for VSTS, show it the script that they were already using, and it worked. We had a little bit of testing in there. It was just very, very surface, just to show that it was alive. And just for the purposes of the hack, we set it to continue on error as well. And at the bottom, of course, we told it to push the image to our Docker repo once it was built. So all good so far. We had to tell it where the repo was. We had to tell it where the Docker file was. And there's the address of the container registry we were using. The image name, so that's just referencing the image that we'd built. And something that we wouldn't have done in production was we had it on the tag with latest instead of having a proper build number. But it was just, you know, while we were working, it was just easier to let people just grab the latest one. There we go. Yes, so there you go. It did work. It did take us a little while to make that build go green, to make each build go green, to be honest. There was quite a lot of fettling we needed to do, but the nice thing in VSTS was that, you know, the logs, any errors you might encounter, are just right there, easy to see, very, very verbose. So eventually we got it to build, and as you can see, we were able to just sort of drill into exactly what happened and see. They were dummy tests, really, but we could see whether the tests are passed or not, even though we'd chosen to skip them. And just the joy of seeing all our components all with green build, having never built them in VSTS before, was really awesome. So, release. Now, we use, as I mentioned before, we use Octopus in-house to release. But because we were in VSTS and we were all happy with our new toys, we decided to use Docker Compose in VSTS again. Now, we weren't ready for Kubernetes there, and Kubernetes wasn't really ready for us on Azure either. So just to keep it really simple, we used Compose files on Swarm because we were just going to deploy to a single VM at this stage. Also, we wanted to keep it Windows because, you know, we knew how things ran on Windows, and of course we were surrounded by Microsoft guys. And it was so easy as well to just write a compose file. All we had to do was specify the image, the ports we needed, any environment variables, dependencies, and of course the networking details. I can show you the compose file later if you want, but of course we've superseded this. We've been playing more with Kubernetes recently. But for this, it was really, really useful. And with a view to our customers as well, we have customers who only have a tiny solution. They only do run it really in real life. They only run it on a single VM. So it was quite real for those guys. So we built a release pipeline, really similar to the build pipeline. You're just pulling in elements and then giving it some parameters to tell it how to behave. For example, we've got our Docker compose command. Again, it just tells us what the registry connection is, where your compose file is located, etc. So, yeah, and also a bit of CI. We had it triggering a new release every time we edited a compose file. In a normal CI environment, we would have wanted it to trigger a release to test at least every time we checked in new code at all. But because we were just you saw that room, there was 20 of us all just changing stuff the whole time, it would have got a bit daft. So we let it trigger only on the compose file changes. So yes, I did sit there changing the compose file by just taking a space in there a couple of times. Anyway, it worked. And at this point, Marcus, I always want to call him Microsoft Marcus, Marcus would say to me that, well, it didn't work straight away, because they actually realized, though we had the containers up and running, and we could see that they were up and running using the Microsoft management system, we could see containers running. Yes, they were fine. They were all alive. But Numéro itself, the components weren't talking to each other. It did actually take the guys 2 more days after the hack to work out exactly what it was that was causing the communication issue between the containers. And of course, even after that, it didn't quite look like that, because that's the fully configured customer bespoke solution. It actually looked much more vanilla than that. Oh, I was just going to show you the operations management suite. So this is how we could tell that the background is just showing you what it looks like. It's not an actual screenshot of where we could see all our containers up and running. But we had just graphs showing us that all our containers were there. And something we weren't sure really, we weren't that worried about exactly how we could see things were running. All we wanted to do was see them. But the operations management suite was actually quite good. Because, and it's even better now, but because it's tailored to Azure, it was automatically looking for information from the containers. It knew what VMs were there, and it was automatically picking up logs about the behavior of those VMs, and just showing us them really fast in this portal. So again, in the environment of the hack where you want to be able to see things really quickly, it was really useful to have this system that was just showing us what was there already, really good. And because, as I mentioned before, we use Elk Stack internally, we were really interested that we could actually just export logs to Elk. And you can do that, you can make it automatically output via Event Hub. I've not actually set that up myself, but the guys have got that running because we've now got one or two of our products actually running on Azure elsewhere as well. So this is what it really looked like when we got it running. Really exciting, isn't it? Just a series of vanilla screens. But we were just so happy. You can just imagine, I've never been so happy to see something so dull on my screen. Just clicking through the menus, it all works. Look at it all working. And bearing in mind the database behind it is all sat there in a container as well, which just shouldn't be. But yeah. So it was about 3 days later, we had the solution all talking to each other nicely. And then it was about another week after that they got all of the Numéro components into containers. Because the minute we got those 3 in, it was really simple. It was just so obvious how to literally just, we had the base containers there anyway as well, so we didn't have to faff with that. But it just was so easy to get the rest in, because it is very intuitive, the way VSTS works, the way the build worked, the way the release worked. And of course, once you built a container, it's it's almost magical. I think we went into it thinking it can't be this easy. And it was. So, having been a bit shell-shocked by these 3 very long, quite confusing days, because like I said, we were split up into teams who was looking at just one lot of the testing, one lot with building, etc. We hadn't seen what the others had done, so it was a little bit voodoo still. We had to kind of put our heads together afterwards and go, well, what did we do? How on earth did we make this work? And then, of course, we went out around the company and showed what we'd done, and externally, if anybody let us talk about it, we'll come out and talk about it as well. And then we began looking at orchestration tools. Like I said before, we used Swarm for this, but we were really interested in Kubernetes. And referring back to those requirements we had from our boss's boss right at the beginning, what we'd done was only a step in the direction of the actual requirements we've been given. We knew that we got it in containers, but at this point, we hadn't tried portability. We knew that we'd got the pushing and update once to different instances down, but again, we hadn't proved it. We knew that it would do that. Hadn't tried having to actually make the solution bespoke. Methodology, we were happy with that, but again, not proven. And scalability and resilience, that wasn't available in the format we'd used. We were going to have to look at Kubernetes. So, within what we're trying to do within the next, I said within the next 6 months on this slide, but because we just suddenly got the go-ahead to move pretty much all our products forward all at once, our team who had been behind all this, we all had to suddenly knuckle down and do a whole lot of other stuff. So we did get a chance to play with Kubernetes on Azure. We did get a little dummy application running in container on Kubernetes in Azure, dead happy. But at that stage, it was still a bit in its infancy. So even though we could see it all running there and the cluster was working, what we couldn't actually get it to scale in and out at that stage. And we tried it using a Kubernetes swarm consisting of a combination of Windows and Linux machines, and we tried it on just pure Linux, but we couldn't quite get it to work. And like I say, we were sort of being taken away onto other projects at that stage. But the great thing now is that having been taken away from it and coming back to it, the tech has moved on now, and actually creating a Kubernetes cluster in Azure is now as easy as creating those DevTest labs was. It's you can spin up a working cluster with Kubernetes configured, able to talk to kubectl using the command line. It's just really, really nice now. So it was quite good that we sort of backed off the cutting edge a little bit there, because it's ready for us. So yeah, what we've been doing, we have been in this intervening time, the Numéro engineers have been looking at rationalizing all the tools they're using. They've been preparing themselves to move to VSTS for real by just looking at making sure everything is... It's mainly, because obviously they've got all their code in Git already, but things like incident tracking, work tracking, they use Redmine right now. So they've been looking at how to automate a migration to VSTS, things like that. They've also been looking at that big monolith and planning how it's going to be pulled out into microservices. They've done a little bit of that already. They've looked at that wonderful but horrendous test suite they've got, and they've begun rationalizing that really, really well. It's amazing the amount of duplication that they had in there. But hey, better too much than too little, maybe. So yeah, we've been able to prepare a lot, and the next things will be to get them in VSTS, have the deployment fully automated. We're going to use Octopus to begin with, but we might go on to Microsoft's own release manager eventually. Also, at the moment, we're using NuGet Package Manager for packages, but we might go on to Microsoft because all of this is still being developed. It's really interesting to watch it coming up, and also they have like a user voice forum that you can go on and just say, like, we need it to do this. And we've had quite a lot of those stories actually answered and coming into into use now. For example, we wanted the package manager to use Maven, to be compatible with Maven, and now it is. So they've just released that. So yeah, next we're going to try and improve the portability. One thing we wanted to do really quickly and didn't was to add the customer config to that Numero solution that we had running in containers and see what the actual nuts and bolts of getting that in place was. What's going to work better? Are we actually going to just stick all the config files in another container? Are we going to, we're going to probably use Microsoft's own hosted SQL solution for the database rather than the containery thing that we shouldn't have done. And what we've also been doing is preparing the next software product decision metrics for containers as well. We've been working with that team just to look at what they need to get in place. And I've been badgering them to have a play with it and make some containers of their own. So that's our story. I know I've sort of, I was aware as I was speaking, I'm sort of mentioning things that I'm kind of assuming that you already know what those things are. If I've said something that was indecipherable, please come and ask me.